The crimson dress clung to me like a second skin, a stark contrast to the starched white shirts I usually wore to work. Tonight was different. Tonight was the annual gala, a glittering affair filled with high-powered executives and their glamorous wives. A world away from spreadsheets and budget reports. David, bless his heart, fumbled with his tie, worry crinkling his brow. "You look amazing," he said, his voice laced with something that wasn't quite approval. "Are you sure about this?" I plastered on a smile, bright and practiced. "Absolutely. It'll be a good chance to network, loosen up a bit." The truth was a tangled mess, a yearning for excitement that our comfortable, predictable life lacked. David, a brilliant engineer but socially awkward, hovered at my side during introductions. But then, like a shark smelling blood, a man materialized beside me. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a smile that could charm the socks off a CFO. "Ethan," he introduced himself, his handshake lingering a touch too long. "David, you must be the genius behind," mentioned David's company. David nodded politely, seemingly oblivious. Ethan's gaze, however, stayed glued to me. "You look stunning," he murmured, his voice low and smooth. Lost in a sea of suits, I had to come find some color. My pulse quickened. Flattery, even empty flattery, was something I rarely received. David, bless him again, was more about logic than compliments. The rest of the night became a blur. Ethan, a venture capitalist with a life as fast-paced as his expensive car, regaled me with stories of exotic locales and high-stakes deals. His world was a whirlwind compared to the predictable rhythm of mine. By the time the last champagne flute was emptied, a strange feeling bubbled in my stomach. Excitement? Curiosity? Whatever it was, it felt wrong. But at the same time, thrillingly different. As we said goodbye, Ethan's eyes held a glint that sent shivers down my spine. "This shouldn't be the end of the conversation," he murmured, brushing his fingers against mine. "Perhaps lunch sometime? To discuss business opportunities?" The word business hung heavy in the air, a thin veil over the unspoken. My heart pounded in my chest, a chaotic drumbeat drowning out the rational voice in my head. I found myself nodding before I could stop myself. Walking back to the car, David's silence was a stark contrast to the buzz in my head. "He seems intense," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. I shrugged, the heat rising to my cheeks. "Just an aggressive investor. Don't worry." But even in the quiet of the car, with David beside me, a seed of something new had been planted. And a part of me, a reckless, curious part, couldn't wait to see where it would grow. The days that followed the gala were a strange mix of guilt and excitement. Every mention of Ethan at work sent a jolt through me. I'd catch myself stealing glances at his picture online, a thrill tingling in my fingertips as I scrolled through his jet-setting adventures. David, blissfully unaware, droned on about the latest project at dinner. Honestly, half the technical jargon went over my head. My mind was replaying the stolen kiss on the moonlit balcony, the soft brush of his lips a lingering sensation on my skin. The shame of it gnawed at me, a dull ache in my stomach. But it was overshadowed by the forbidden thrill of the secret, the knowledge that I was doing something I shouldn't. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. One afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Lunch tomorrow?" The message read. "Same place?" A shiver ran down my spine, equal parts fear and anticipation. I glanced at David, typing away at his laptop, completely engrossed. My stomach twisted with guilt, a voice in my head screaming at me to ignore the message. But another voice, a rebellious one, whispered of stolen moments and exciting possibilities. With trembling fingers, I typed a quick response. "Sure. See you then." The guilt was a heavy weight, but the thrill of the unknown was even stronger. The next day, my lunch break felt like an eternity. David, bless his predictable routine, packed a healthy salad while I opted for something quick at my desk. The anticipation gnawed at me, a constant buzz beneath the surface. Finally, the clock struck 12. I grabbed my purse, a flimsy excuse about a client meeting forming on my lips. David barely looked up from his work. "See you later," he mumbled, oblivious to the churning storm in my chest. The restaurant was a bustling hub of lunchtime deals. I spotted Ethan in a corner booth, a smug smile playing on his lips. As I sat down, a wave of heat flushed my cheeks. "There you are," he said, his voice low and inviting. "Took you long enough." I mumbled an apology, the weight of my actions suddenly hitting me. We ordered, the conversation forced and awkward at first. But with every sip of wine, my inhibitions loosened. Ethan was everything David wasn't: charming, worldly, and exuding an aura of exciting danger. He spoke of exotic trips planned and high-stakes deals, a world far removed from the spreadsheets and deadlines of my everyday life. The hours flew by in a haze of laughter, flirting, and an undercurrent of something more. By the time I snuck back to the office, the guilt had morphed into a different kind of fear. What if David found out? The afternoon stretched before me, filled with stolen glances at my phone and a gnawing anxiety. For the first time, the thrill of the secret began to feel like a ticking time bomb, a dark stain on what had always been a safe and predictable world. My phone buzzed on the desk, a notification popping up on the screen. It was a simple message. Lunch tomorrow? The sender, Ethan. My heart hammered against my ribs like a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every rational bone in my body screamed at me to ignore it, to delete the message and pretend it never existed. But the allure of escape, of a world outside the monotonous routine of work and home, was too strong to resist. With trembling fingers, I typed a quick reply. Sure. Same place? Shame flooded me as I hit send, the weight of my deceit pressing down on me. The next day stretched before me in an unbearable slow drip. David, oblivious, packed his usual healthy lunch while I settled for a quick sandwich at my desk. My stomach churned with nerves and guilt, a cocktail that soured my coffee and left a bitter residue on my tongue. Finally, the clock struck 12. I grabbed my purse, a flimsy excuse about a client meeting forming on my lips. David barely looked up from his computer. See you later, he mumbled, his usual absent-minded goodbye. The restaurant was a familiar haven for our stolen lunches. Ethan was already in our usual booth, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. As I sat down, a wave of heat flushed my cheeks, a stark contrast to the coldness spreading through my gut. The first few minutes were awkward, the conversation stilted and forced. But with every sip of wine, the tension loosened, the guilt temporarily pushed aside by the exhilarating danger of the situation. Ethan seemed to revel in my discomfort. He oozed an aura of confidence that David, for all his brilliance, lacked. He regaled me with stories of exotic locations and high-stakes deals, weaving a tapestry of adventure that was a stark contrast to the predictable rhythm of life with David. The hours flew by in a blur of laughter, hushed innuendos, and a constant dance of unspoken desires. By the time I snuck back to the office, the guilt had morphed into a different kind of fear. What if David found out? The afternoon dragged on, punctuated with stolen glances at my phone and a gnawing anxiety. For the first time, the thrill of the secret began to feel like a ticking time bomb. My seemingly perfect life, the one I'd built with David, felt precariously balanced on a knife's edge. That night at dinner, David seemed different, quieter, more observant. He watched me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. We haven't been ourselves lately, he finally said, his voice filled with a quiet concern that cracked through my carefully constructed facade. Panic surged through me, a primal urge to run and hide. Work stress, I stammered, the flimsy excuse falling flat even to my own ears. David's gaze held mine, searching for something I couldn't define. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. A part of me hoped he wouldn't press further, wouldn't see the cracks appearing in the facade of our perfect marriage. But the other part, a tiny voice drowned out by fear and guilt, yearned for him to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm that was growing between us. David's brow furrowed, a crease forming between his usually carefree eyebrows. My flimsy excuse about work stress hung heavy in the air. I could practically feel his gaze dissecting me, searching for something hidden beneath the surface. Is that all? He finally asked, his voice soft but laced with a skepticism I hadn't heard before. Panic tightened its grip around my throat. I stammered, desperately searching for something, anything, to solidify my lie. But the words wouldn't come. He sighed, a long, weary exhale. All right, he mumbled, pushing himself away from the table. Long day, I guess. Relief washed over me, cold and fleeting. The weight of the secret, however, remained, a heavy stone lodged in my gut. Every stolen glance at my phone, every furtive text exchange with Ethan, felt like another chip breaking away from the carefully constructed facade of my life. The following weeks were a whirlwind of stolen lunches and hushed conversations. The thrill of the secret, initially exhilarating, began to curdle into a sickening dread. Ethan's touch, once exciting, now felt predatory, a constant reminder of the line I'd so easily crossed. One night, after a work event fueled by far too much champagne, things spiraled out of control. The blurry details of the night were filled with laughter, misplaced flirtations, and a growing sense of unease. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a stranger's bed, sunlight streaming through the window, the sheets tangled around me. A wave of nausea washed over me, a physical manifestation of the dread that had been festering inside. This wasn't the exciting escape I'd craved, it was a terrifying descent into a world I didn't recognize. Back home, everything seemed different. David's usual smile seemed strained, his eyes holding a depth I hadn't noticed before. His questions about my day, once routine, now carried a new intensity, an unspoken suspicion that sent shivers down my spine. With every stolen glance, every nervous reply, I felt the carefully constructed facade I'd built around my life begin to crumble. It was like a sandcastle on the beach, slowly being eroded by the relentless tide of my deceit. Then, the final blow. One evening, as I checked my emails after work, a notification popped up on the screen. It was from Ethan's account, a weekend getaway confirmation for two, displayed on our home computer. My blood ran cold. The thrill of the secret had vanished, replaced by a paralyzing fear. The truth, like a rogue wave, was about to crash down on me, threatening to engulf everything I held dear. The email notification on the screen was a stark red beacon in the sea of mundane work emails. My breath hitched, and a cold dread pooled in my stomach. It was from Ethan's account, an open confirmation for a weekend getaway planned for two. Right there, on our home computer. David's voice, cold and hard, shattered the silence. "What is this?" He pointed at the screen, his eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. The playful glint of curiosity I'd occasionally caught in them was replaced by a raw, burning anger. Lies tumbled from my lips, clumsy and desperate. I stammered about a work trip, a last-minute conference I'd forgotten to mention. But the words felt hollow even to my own ears. David saw through them easily, his face hardening into a mask of betrayal and pain. The air crackled with unspoken words, accusations hanging heavy in the room. I wanted to explain, to somehow rewind time and erase the consequences of my actions, but the words wouldn't come. All I could manage were choked sobs, tears spilling down my cheeks like a broken dam. The following days were a blur of tearful apologies and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I poured my heart out, bearing the ugly truth of my loneliness and the reckless thrill I'd chased with Ethan. But David, my David, remained shrouded in a shell of silence. The warmth and love that had once filled our home were replaced by a chilling emptiness that echoed in every corner. The lawyer arrived one afternoon, a crisp suit and a briefcase full of legalese. David's quiet efficiency during the consultation was a stark contrast to his usual gentle nature. Each word spoken felt like a hammer blow, slowly dismantling the life we'd built together. The weight of the impending divorce pressed down on me, suffocating. The future I'd taken for granted, the comfortable routine I'd craved an escape from, now seemed like a lost paradise. In a desperate attempt to salvage what was left, I contacted Ethan. But the charming voice that had initially seduced me was now devoid of warmth, laced with a hint of amusement. "It's out in the open then," he said, a cold nonchalance in his voice. "Seems like your little weekend getaway isn't happening." His words were a slap in the face, a brutal reminder of how easily I'd been manipulated. The thrill of the secret, the excitement of a forbidden world, had vanished, replaced by a bitter sting of betrayal, his and my own. Alone in the wreckage of my decisions, I was left with nothing but the deafening silence in our once loving home and the crushing weight of regret. The comfortable life I'd yearned for escape from was now a distant memory, replaced by a frightening uncertainty that stretched before me like a vast, empty road. Ethan's voice on the phone, devoid of concern or even a hint of apology, slammed into me like a physical blow. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train: he never cared. I was just a fleeting thrill, a notch on his designer belt in the grand adventure of his life. Tears streamed down my face, a bitter cocktail of regret and humiliation. The following weeks were a blur of legalese and heartbreak. David, once my confidant, the person I shared every thought and worry with, became a stranger shrouded in legal jargon and quiet contemplation. The lawyer, a constant presence, spoke in terms of assets and settlements, further solidifying the cold reality of our situation. My parents arrived, their faces etched with concern and a hint of disappointment I couldn't bear to meet. Their questions were unspoken, hovering in the strained silence like accusing ghosts. I retreated further into myself, a shell of the woman I once was, haunted by the memories of our shattered life. Evenings were the worst. The empty space beside me on the couch, the untouched plate at the dinner table. Each detail a stark reminder of the warmth and connection I'd so carelessly thrown away. The silence in our once shared home was a deafening roar, filled with the echoes of whispered promises and broken vows. I clung desperately to the hope that David would see past my betrayal, that we could somehow rebuild the life I'd so carelessly destroyed. But with each passing day, with every curt exchange and every averted glance, that hope dwindled. In his eyes, I saw a flicker of something that looked suspiciously like pity. It was a far cry from the love and warmth that had once been there, and it gnawed at me more than any accusation ever could. One night, unable to bear the suffocating silence any longer, I broke down. Tears streamed down my face as I confessed everything, my yearning for excitement, the initial thrill of Ethan's attention, and the sickening realization of his true intentions. David listened, his face impassive, his silence a wall I couldn't penetrate. Finally, when I had run out of words, he spoke, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "It's too late," he said simply. The finality in his voice shattered the last remnants of hope I clung to. The weight of his words settled on me like a shroud. The future I'd once taken for granted, the comfortable routine I'd craved and escaped from, now seemed like a lost paradise. I had chased a fleeting thrill and ended up destroying everything I truly valued. The path ahead stretched before me, a vast and empty landscape filled with uncertainty and the crushing weight of regret. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, a cold, sterile echo of the warmth and joy that had marked our wedding day. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, thick with unspoken emotions and the weight of shattered vows. Each word uttered by the lawyers, each legal term tossed around, was a hammer blow to my already fractured heart. David sat across from me, a stranger bound by a shared past. His face, usually etched with warmth and kindness, now seemed older, the lines around his eyes deeper. A spark of sadness flickered in them, a sadness that mirrored my own. As the judge spoke the final words, severing the legal ties that had bound us, a choked sob escaped my lips. The weight of my actions pressed down on me, suffocating. The life I'd built, the life I'd taken for granted, was now a collection of memories echoing in the sterile emptiness of the courtroom. Stepping outside, the world seemed muted, devoid of the vibrant colors it once held. The familiar city streets looked foreign, the bustling crowds a cacophony of noise that failed to penetrate the fog of grief and regret that clouded my mind. The future stretched before me, an uncertain path I would have to navigate alone. The empty house, once a haven of love and laughter, now felt like a tomb. Every corner held a silent accusation, every object a painful reminder of the life I'd so carelessly destroyed. The worn armchair where David used to read, the chipped coffee mug he always used in the mornings, each detail a shard of a shattered dream. I wandered through the rooms, a ghost haunting the ruins of my own happiness. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the echo of my own footsteps and the relentless whisper of regret. Picking up a framed photo from happier times, a wave of despair washed over me. It was a picture of us on our wedding day, smiles as bright as the future we'd envisioned. The carefree joy in our eyes was a stark contrast to the emptiness that stared back at me now. Tears streamed down my face, blurring the image in the frame. A single question echoed in the vast emptiness of the house, a question with no easy answer. How, in chasing a fleeting thrill, had I managed to destroy everything that truly mattered? Reaching out to friends felt like wading through mud. Shame, a heavy shroud, choked any words that tried to form. Their concerned texts and calls went unanswered, the guilt a physical barrier pushing them away. I was adrift in a sea of regret, isolated from the world I once knew. Days bled into weeks, a dull ache settling permanently in my chest. The fleeting thrill I'd chased had morphed into a constant, gnawing emptiness. Every corner of the once familiar house held a painful reminder of what I'd lost. One afternoon, sorting through a box of forgotten belongings, I stumbled upon a treasure trove of happier times. Photos captured us in younger, carefree versions of ourselves, faces beaming with genuine joy. Love letters, filled with sweet nothings and whispered promises, brought tears stinging to my eyes. Buried beneath the mementos, I found a well-worn copy of a book, a gift from David on our anniversary. The title, Second Chances, seemed to mock me from the worn cover. Yet, a flicker of hope, fragile yet persistent, ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild what I'd so carelessly destroyed. Taking a deep breath, I decided to focus on myself. I enrolled in an art class, a passion I'd neglected during my marriage. The vibrant colors and the freedom of expression became a form of therapy, each brushstroke a way to paint over the cracks in my shattered life. Slowly, tentatively, I reconnected with old friends. Apologies tumbled out, heartfelt and raw. Forgiveness, though hesitant at first, began to bloom, fragile but hopeful. Weeks turned into months. The raw pain dulled to a manageable ache, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild my life, brick by broken brick. One evening, while showcasing my work at an art exhibition, a familiar face stopped me in my tracks. It was David, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and curiosity.